Hey everybody, Kenny here. In today's video, we're going to be discussing some tips and tricks for the game Stranger of Sword City. A couple quick disclaimers before we start. If you are particularly experienced with the Wizardry franchise of games, then a majority of these tips really won't have value for you. This is more for people who are just getting to this game and don't really have a background in this type of game, though there will be some information that will be specific to Stranger of Sword City. And also, just so I don't waste anybody's time who's willing to put in the effort themselves, if you press escape or start, depending on what platform you're playing on, and go to the member manual, the majority of this information can be found there. With those out of the way, let's get started. Of primary importance, I believe that knowing your map button is at the top of the list. So if we press start or escape, once again, depending on the platform you're playing on, and look at our control information, whatever is bound for the map button, that is your bread and butter for this game. Not only will this allow you to stay aware of your party's position on the map, but once you've uncovered the full map, you can simply pick a spot and the game will autopath you there. There are some places where this will not work, such as puzzle maps where walls close off behind you as you pass through them and things such as that. But for the most part, this is a critical boon that cannot be overstated. Another invaluable asset to your adventure is actually something very obvious, but I wish to note because you'd be surprised how many people overlook it. But talking to the NPCs as often as possible is critical to allowing you to continue on with the game. Sometimes you'll think that you haven't been accomplishing anything, and suddenly an NPC in one of the three hubs will suddenly have a new quest for you that you didn't realize you satisfied any conditions to activate. NPCs also happen to offer up rumors for how to get access to some of the more obscure lineage battles, which are very important for attaining the bloodstones you need in order to progress the game at certain intervals. This next one I consider the most important combat related tip, and even though the UI clearly tells you how to do this during every battle, is still something that I know is very easy for people to overlook, and that is the repeat and fast apply command. So in combat, up here in the top middle, you'll see the button assigned to whatever your repeat button is. Then when prompted, instead of apply action or redo, select fast apply. And this will save you so much time, it's really kind of crazy. This is an instance of a full battle taking place using characters that are fairly high level and have very powerful equipment and abilities. And this is that same battle using the repeat command with fast apply. It's really unbelievable. And the nice bit of quality of life here is that if you were using concentrate or hide, the repeat command will actually use the follow-up skill the next time you use the repeat command. Next up, let's discuss trap priority. In Stranger of Sword City, you are going to encounter many chests while ambushing enemies, and very often these chests will be trapped. I'll go over what ambushing is later, but for now, I just want to mention the priority that you should give the different trap options when encountering these chests. If you happen to see Mimic as an option, regardless of what else is on that list, always pick Mimic. Especially early on, when the Mimic's natural stats are just so high that it will be able to wipe out your entire party just attacking. But even later on, it is still very much an enemy to be feared, since the Mimic can and will cast spells that just kill your party. Now, it may not kill everyone, but it is possible that at least one party member will die when it casts a particular spell. For this reason, Mimic is your top priority at all times. After Mimic is Explosion. Explosion deals a tremendous amount of damage to every member of your party who gets hit by it. It is possible for a party member to avoid trap, but this is not a guarantee. So if you don't see a mimic but you see explosion, pick explosion as a trap to save yourself some massive damage. Next up, and this I believe warrants its place more so early on than later on, but early on in the game, your spellcasters will not have a lot of MP, so the Lich Hand trap can be devastating if you're depending on spells for anything. So that's what I recommend. If you don't see a Mimic, you don't see Explosion, I recommend Lich Hand. If you're further on in the game and MP isn't as big of a problem for you, then I recommend prioritizing Poison over Lich Hand. More so because Poison will require you to spend either items or spells on healing the poison. And I know that when traveling around the dungeons, poison isn't that big of a deal. It's just 1 HP per step. But in combat, every round that you have poison on, you take around 10% of your health every round. So you definitely do not want that status if you're going to be continuing on either ambushing or just continuing through the dungeon. So Lich Hand early on, poison later on. Prioritize them around the same based on how important your MP is to you at the time. After that, I recommend prioritizing the teleport trap. This is more of an inconvenient thing. The teleport trap can place you just a few feet away from where the trap set off, but I have had it teleport me to a completely different level of the dungeon and even to a place in the dungeon that I hadn't even explored yet. So that is something to be on the lookout for. And then, bottom of the barrel is Needle. Needle, I think, hits you for like 10% of each party member that takes the hit. Needle will hit them for about 10% of their HP, I think. So it's definitely nowhere near as hazardous as a mimic or an explosion, and definitely the most innocuous of the traps that you can come across. Now let's discuss ambushing. Ambushing in Stranger of Sword City is the most valuable thing you can do in that game. It is the primary source of equipment and experience that you receive throughout your adventure. As such, understanding the variables involved is to your benefit. Whenever you start an ambush, which can only be performed when inside rooms that have the designated tiles, as you see here, you'll see these slashes appear on the screen, and you can continue to pass and you'll see the slashes tick up until you can no longer pass and you have to fight or run away. Those are your options. However, unlike the wording given by the developers, if you were to look at the member manual and pay attention to the tutorial at the beginning, those ticks do not actually represent an increase in difficulty. I'm not actually sure what they meant when they said that. I don't know if it was a translation error or if they said encounter would become harder and meant that perhaps the potential rewards would get better. I'm not really sure. What I do know is that whether it's the first slash or the final, I have not found any correlation which dictates that the difficulty of the encounter has been increased. I've had enemies twice the level of the normal enemies in the area appear in the first slash. I've had enemies that are just the normal level for that area appear as the last slash. So I really don't know what they meant by that. Much of the time when you enter these ambushes, the enemies will be obscured to you. Now, if you fought these enemies, for the most part, you'll know what each one is, simply based on the silhouette. But this is actually a harken back to the Wizardry series, where you would encounter enemies and you wouldn't be able to recognize them, so they would appear as a silhouette instead of as actually, not even really a silhouette. They'd appear as like a shadow, an obscured shadow. Whereas in this case, they chose to go for a look where you can better tell what it is, as opposed to in Wizardry where you would just see a jumble of a shadowy mass that eventually you could tell what it's supposed to be, but at the beginning seemed like some kind of weird creature itself. Anyway, this is dictated by the intelligence stat and the identification ability of your party. So if you have a character in your party who is really good at identification, then they'll be able to identify the enemy and they'll appear in their full form. But if, I guess, they have a bad roll, then the enemy will appear like this, where it's just completely obscured and shadowed. A kind of nice thing they did to, I guess, lend a sense of reason to the whole affair. If you're in an area that is clearly very well lit, such as this lava river area here, then you will never see an obscured enemy. Like, they'll be in full view to you, and you'll be able to tell what each of them are. However, in most ambush rooms, they're usually very low light, which is why, for the most part, you'll see them in this obscured view instead of fully being able to immediately identify them, like in this area. Another thing to be aware of when determining which ambush encounter to choose. The chest that you see as the encounter is coming up ranges from a wooden chest to a metal chest to this more ornate looking silver chest to this very elaborate chest. Now, those grade changes are meant to represent an increasing quality of the rewards you receive from the chest. But in my experience, it doesn't. I can honestly say that in terms of percentages, I've received higher quality rewards from metal chests than I have from the silver or gold chests. Once again, I don't know if this was an issue with RNG or what, but it's quite noticeable, and you shouldn't just pick an encounter just because it has a nicer looking chest. If it has a particular type of gear that you're looking for, it doesn't matter if it's wood or metal, silver, or gold. If it's what you're trying to get, then go for it. And it'll always tell you what the reward's going to be. Whether it's going to be cloth armor, a cloth hat, a medium or heavy armor or hat, an accessory, an item, a specific kind of weapon. It'll always identify what it's going to be. And interestingly enough, they tie the rewards to certain enemy groups. So let's take this mine ambush spot. If you see this zombie group here, then you know the reward is either going to be a middle to heavy armor helmet, a middle to heavy armor, a hammer, or an axe. You will not receive any other rewards from a zombie encounter here. However, if we were to look at the slimes or these loader looking enemies, they tend to guard underwear and accessories and some different weapons that you don't see with the zombie encounter. And same with these flying enemies. They tend to have bows and katanas. So you kind of have a secondary visual identifier as to not specifically what you're going to find, but the categories that are going to be available to you will be represented by the enemies that you're fighting. Now let's discuss the force spells. The force spells in Stranger of Sword City are essentially MP activated passives. So unlike, let's say, Dragon Quest, where you would use the Holy Protection spell and it would let you move like 15 to 20 tiles without a random encounter, in Stranger of Sword City, these force spells last for the entire duration of the labyrinth. So until you actually go out to the world map to get your items identified and everything, those spells will remain active. So you do a force chime to increase the rate of random encounters and the strength of the enemies you encounter. That'll be there the entire time. If you use hide to increase the value of ambush spots and avoid random encounters and even on the field encounters with lower level enemies, that'll be active the entire time. Doesn't matter how many floors you go through, doesn't matter if you do a transition to a separated area, like going from the mines into the slums or vice versa. These will remain active. They are very nice quality of life, and once you're high enough level that the MP cost isn't a huge burden, then I highly recommend using them whenever possible. Now let's talk about rehunting lineages. If you decide to do some grinding, which you almost certainly will do, as certain areas just require you to be stronger than you were in the area before them, lineages that you've encountered previously will respawn and cause a teleport stone to become inactive. The easy way to tell where this has happened is go into the menu, go to info, go to lineages, and you'll see it on the list here, specifically which area it showed up at, so you know that if you normally go to this particular stone to get somewhere, now you're going to have to start from somewhere else and make your way to that stone to rehunt that lineage so that you can use it again, both for leaving the labyrinth and for having a more convenient starting spot when entering the labyrinth. Rehunting lineages does not reward you with another bloodstone, but they do tend to have much higher blood crystal rewards and tend to drop other items on top of that. Now let's talk about Mumik. Mumik is a mimic that you can talk to or fight, but if you talk to him, you can offer him unique items that you found. Unique items represented by this yellow grating here. And the reason for doing this is that if you found the unique item that has a terrible modifier, like it's like a +1, then if you would like to find that item with a much higher modifier, the way you do that is by offering it up to Mumik, and then you get the chance for it to drop again with a higher modifier. You could also end up finding it at the same modifier or lower, but this allows you to alter that. And this is the only way to do that, since every unique item is actually unique. If you were to sell that item, you will never find it again. If you were to store that item hoping to find another one, you never will. That is the only one of its kind, and the only thing you can do to get a better one is to offer it to Mumik and hope to find it again with a better modifier later on. That's it for this video. I hope you found these tips helpful. Stranger of Sword City is not a particularly accessible game, but in the dungeon crawling RPG genre, I consider it to be one of the best. And I really hope that if you watch this, that you'll be able to appreciate it as well. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. See you next time. Bye.